unlike the police sketch of the Zodiac, Alan is baldy. Toschi is tall. The forensics don't support it, but his gut still says Alan is guilty. The chance to finally settle the matter comes 2 decades later, in the 1990s, with a scientific breakthrough. By now, Toschi has retired, and Inspector Vince Repetto has taken over the case.
At that time, forensic DNA testing was relatively new. We knew we had Arthur Lee Allen's DNA, and then we had DNA from one of the suspected letters.
Saliva from the back of the stamp is tested against Allen's DNA.
My partner was, very excited that we might be in some way take part in the solving of this crime.
And the results come in. Arthur Lee Allen's DNA doesn't match either.
Rick was very deflated. He was physically and demonstratively upset, like, man, I thought we had him. He was, he really thought that we were going to solve this case, and we didn't. He was pretty upset that it turned out not to be Arthur Lee Allen.
But if all this doesn't stack up, how can Don Chaney's testimony be explained? We reveal what the Zodiac movie doesn't, that suspicion now shifts from Allen to Chaney.
Don Chaney may have seemed like a compelling witness, but there were several problems with his story. Originally, he claimed that this conversation took place before the Zodiac murders began, but after discovering that some elements of his story did not match up on the timing, he changed the timing of the conversation.
It becomes increasingly doubtful whether Allen had said what Chaney claimed.
Chaney's credibility also suffered because after certain information was published in the media, he would then adapt his stories to include that information.
Chaney continued to make allegations against Arthur Lee Allen for decades. Michael Butterfield makes the claim of how incredible Chaney's alleged fabrications become.
When I interviewed Don Chaney, he told me that Arthur Lee Allen confessed his desire to fly airplanes into the Sears Tower, but the Sears Tower did not exist when this conversation supposedly took place.
But if he was making unfounded allegations against Allen, what possible motivation could Chaney have had?
Don Chaney complained that Allen had attempted to molest one of his children.
If Chaney thought Arthur Lee Allen had attempted to molest his child, that could have been a strong motivation for revenge. The books on which the Hollywood film Zodiac is based cite reams of circumstantial evidence against Allen and popularize the idea of him as the prime suspect, despite the lack of forensic evidence. Even after Allen's death in 1992, many still consider him the prime suspect.
Because of the book, and the information in that book which appear to make Allen seem as if he must be the Zodiac, many people are convinced that Arthur Lee Allen was in fact the Zodiac killer. However, the facts tell a very different story.
But if it wasn't Allen, who was it? Back in 1971, Inspector Toschi received a lead to another very promising suspect.
The postcard depicted a housing development project in Lake Tahoe. There was also some letters cut out of newspapers that had phrases like "sought victim 12" and "peek through the pines."
The postcard bears the Zodiac's crosshair symbol, and it suggests the Zodiac has other victims. Toschi discovers that in the previous year, 25-year-old Donna Lass mysteriously disappeared from where the postcard suggested. This was about 11 months after the Zodiac's last confirmed attack, where he killed the cab driver. This clue leads him to an incredible new suspect.
One man became a suspect because, according to some witnesses, he had known Donna Lass, the woman who disappeared in Lake Tahoe.
Could this man be the Zodiac? There are startling similarities. The suspect, Larry Kane, lived in Lake Tahoe, where Donna Lass disappeared. He previously lived in San Francisco, when the Zodiac killed the cab driver. And there are disputed claims the suspect also knew Zodiac victim Darlene Ferrin. The coincidences keep growing.
This man had been in the Navy and apparently received some training in ciphers. He also had a criminal record of assault, battery, and other instances of criminal behavior.
But Toschi is unable to find enough solid evidence against him. His guilt is still unresolved when Toschi moves off the case in 1978. Progress stalls until finally, a few decades later, when in 1997, Inspector Tom Bruton takes over the case.
There was just an enormous amount of circumstantial evidence. He always seemed to be in the vicinity of where a possible Zodiac crime occurred. He also changed his name several times for no apparent good reason.
Inspector Bruton and his partner visit the man for questioning and take samples of his handwriting and DNA. Could science finally unmask the Zodiac?
We had compared handwriting and fingerprints with what we had in the crime lab, and there was no matches there. The last big hope was a DNA comparison.
But the DNA results come back negative. Larry Kane is exonerated.
That was kind of the final straw as far as we were concerned.
This is just one of many instances where police or amateurs are convinced it's someone, but their theory is at odds with the forensic evidence.
I saw a lot of compelling circumstantial evidence against maybe a dozen suspects. Obviously, they all couldn't be the Zodiac. It's a good possibility none of them were.
The police faced a list of over 2,500 possible suspects. This is a problem Chronicle journalist Kevin Fagan is all too familiar with.
The sea of claims and leads is as large as the Atlantic. I mean, it's huge. I had tons of people say, oh yeah, I had coffee at the table next to the Zodiac. It looked exactly like him. He was wearing the same glasses. I've been covering the Zodiac case for more than 20 years at the Chronicle, and I get hundreds of tips.
Many of the people who believe they have identified the Zodiac suffer from what's known as confirmation bias. They look for information which confirms their theory while usually studiously ignoring information which does not. And that is one of the reasons that we probably haven't identified the Zodiac, is because we continue to spend a lot of time on the wrong people.
In fact, we may never discover the killer's true identity.
If the Zodiac is still alive, he's probably laughing because he's been watching other people be accused of his crimes for years. And as long as authorities and amateur sleuths and others are looking at those suspects, they're not looking for him, and he's safe, and he knows it.
But the shocking truth is that Toschi very nearly did capture the Zodiac, as one of his letters revealed. We rewind to the very day Inspector Toschi found himself first thrust into the case. The Zodiac has just shot dead taxi driver Paul Stein. 3 children have seen him wiping down the cab before leaving the scene of the crime. The police are already on their way. Around this time, for some reason, there is a critical communication error.
During the confusion and the fear of that moment, it's possible that they may have said something like, the man's wearing a black jacket or black pants. And somehow the dispatcher misheard this and then repeated they were looking for a black man instead of a white man.
2 officers, Don Falk and his partner, were approaching the scene in a patrol car.
They were driving west on Jackson Street when they saw a white man walking along the sidewalk.
There are disputed claims they even stopped and talked with the man, with no idea he might be the Zodiac.
Those
cops apparently stopped him and asked him if he had seen a black man in the neighborhood anywhere. I believe he said that he did see a guy heading in a certain direction opposite from the way he was going, and they said thanks and took off and drove away.
Because the man did not match the description, Officer Don Fowke said that he just kept driving. Shortly after that, the police description was broadcast correctly as a white man, but by that time, the man had disappeared, and Don Fowke and his partner were unable to find him. This must have been quite a shock to Dave Toschi to learn that the Zodiac slipped through their fingers. A simple mistake let the most notorious serial killer in American history escape justice.
I'd love it if someday we found out who this guy was and had some idea of what motivated him and why he did it. I really don't think we'll ever know.
Over 1 year, the Zodiac murdered at least 5 innocent victims and terrorized the Bay Area. He achieved his desire for notoriety by taunting Toschi and the press with letters and codes. Even modern scientific advances have failed to bring the Zodiac to justice.